The moment I saw the message, my world cracked open. I wasn't even supposed to be looking at Kate's phone, but it buzzed right as I was getting up from the couch. I picked it up, thinking it was just another one of her work notifications. But the name on the screen caught me off guard: Justin. My cousin. It wasn't unusual for them to text. He'd always been around, part of family gatherings, and Kate seemed to enjoy his company. But something about the way his name flashed made me pause. I swiped open the message before I could think twice. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." I stared at the screen, trying to process the words. My first instinct was denial. This couldn't be real. Maybe it was a joke, or I was misreading the tone. But the more I scrolled, the worse it got. I found myself diving deeper into their messages, each one another punch to the gut. They weren't talking about family get-togethers. These were detailed, intimate confessions. Things I hadn't heard from Kate in months. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to hold myself together. I could feel the rage bubbling up, but I knew better than to explode. Not yet. Not before I had everything I needed. I put the phone down carefully, like it was some kind of bomb, and walked out to the backyard. The cool evening air hit my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. Kate was inside, probably finishing up some work emails, unaware that her little secret had just come crashing down. As I stared out into the dark, memories began to surface. Kate and Justin laughed together at family barbecues, and he offers to help her with some project or another. It all seemed so innocent back then. How could I have missed it? Was I that blind? I clenched my fists. They had betrayed me, and they thought I wouldn't notice. But now I knew, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. If they wanted to play games, I was about to show them how it was done. I didn't confront Kate that night. I didn't smash her phone or scream at her, though every part of me wanted to. Instead, I lay awake next to her in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. I knew that if I just confronted them, they'd lie or apologize, and it would all be swept under the rug. No, I needed to hit them where it hurt. Family has always been the cornerstone of everything for us. Every year, we had these big gatherings: Christmas, Thanksgiving, and summer barbecues. And next weekend was one of the biggest events. My parents were hosting the annual family reunion. All the cousins, uncles, aunts, it would be perfect. I decided I would wait until then. Expose them in front of everyone. Let Kate and Justin squirm while the whole family watched their dirty little secret unravel. I'd make sure they couldn't explain it away, not when I had the proof right in my hands. Over the next few days, I prepared. Every night, while Kate thought I was working late or out with friends, I was gathering more evidence. Screenshots, old photos of them sneaking away at family events, and anything I could use to build my case. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy them. Kate seemed oblivious, which only fueled my anger. She smiled at me over breakfast, kissed me goodbye before work, and even suggested we go out for dinner one night like everything was perfectly normal. But all I could see was the lies. Her lips were tainted with the taste of betrayal, and every time she touched me, it felt like poison. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready. We arrived at my parents' house, and I could already feel the tension building inside me. Kate was her usual charming self, greeting everyone with hugs and smiles, while I forced myself to stay calm. Justin arrived a little later, flashing that same cocky grin he always had. I wanted to wipe it off his face. As we sat down for dinner, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, my moment. I had rehearsed this in my head 100 times. And now it was about to unfold. Dinner was in full swing. The clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation filled the dining room, everyone blissfully unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. Kate was sitting across from me, laughing with my aunt about some family vacation, while Justin sat to my left, too close for comfort. The tension in my chest was unbearable, but I stayed calm, waiting for the perfect moment. I watched them both as I sipped my drink. Kate, with her casual smile, completely unaware of what was coming, and Justin, confidently laughing along with the jokes, as if he hadn't betrayed his own family. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to make sure this would hit hard. It wasn't just about exposing their affair, it was about tearing apart the illusion they had built. The conversation shifted to family values, loyalty, and trust. My father, always the one to speak about family traditions, raised his glass, saying something about how we've all stuck together through thick and thin. That was my cue. I leaned back in my chair, setting down my fork, and let out a short laugh. Everyone turned to look at me. Kate raised an eyebrow, slightly confused, while Justin continued chewing, oblivious to the weight of the moment. You know, I began, it's funny how we always talk about trust and loyalty in this family. Like it's something sacred. The room grew quieter. Kate shot me a curious look, and Justin finally looked up, his grin faltering. I've been thinking a lot about loyalty lately. And what it really means. I let my eyes linger on Kate, who now looked slightly uncomfortable, before shifting to Justin. Especially when it comes to people you trust the most. Justin swallowed hard. He could sense something was off, but he hadn't pieced it together yet. Not until I dropped the bomb. You'd think family would be the last place where betrayal happens, right? But sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who stab you in the back. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. My aunt stopped mid-bite, and my mom shifted in her seat, sensing that something was about to go horribly wrong. Kate's face paled slightly, and Justin's hands froze on his glass. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I've been keeping a little secret, I said, my voice steady. And it's time everyone knew. Kate's eyes widened, and Justin went rigid. I unlocked my phone and held it up for everyone to see. Kate, Justin, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Care to explain these? I swiped through the screen, showing message after message. Intimate texts between the two of them. The evidence was undeniable. Gasps filled the room as my relatives leaned in, craning their necks to see the incriminating messages. My aunt dropped her fork, her mouth hanging open in shock. What the hell is this? My uncle muttered, disbelief etched on his face. Kate's face drained of color. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Justin, on the other hand, sat frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. The cocky grin he wore earlier had completely vanished. I think it's pretty clear what it is, I continued, my voice cold and unforgiving. Kate and Justin have been sneaking around behind my back for months. While the rest of us were busy being a family, these two decided to betray us. Everyone sat in stunned silence. My father, always the rock of the family, was speechless. My mother covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. The weight of the revelation hit like a freight train. Kate finally found her voice. Eric, she started, but I cut her off. Don't you dare try to explain this, I snapped. You've been lying to me, to all of us. And you, I turned to Justin, my anger boiling over, you're supposed to be my cousin. My blood, and this is how you repay me? Justin didn't respond. He just stared down at his plate, as if hoping the ground would swallow him whole. This isn't just about me, I said, my voice rising. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed this entire family. All of us. And you thought you could get away with it. Well, now everyone knows the truth. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kate sat there, her eyes darting around the room, looking for some kind of support, but no one came to her defense. My parents looked at her with a mix of shock and disgust. My uncle and aunt stared daggers at Justin. The betrayal wasn't just mine, it was everyone's now. Finally, Kate broke down, her hands covering her face as she started to cry. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was too late to apologize. The damage was done. The trust had been shattered, and there was no going back. Kate's sobs echoed through the room, but they barely registered with me. I had already steeled myself for this moment, and her tears meant nothing now. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, their eyes flicking back and forth between Kate and Justin like they were trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. The truth was out in the open, and there was no way to take it back. I had planned for this to hurt, but now that the damage was done, I felt hollow. Justin sat with his head bowed, still not saying a word. The man who had laughed and joked with me at every family reunion, who had been a brother more than a cousin, now sat there like a ghost, pale and silent. Part of me had hoped he would fight back, deny it all, but he was too much of a coward. There was no fight in him, just shame. And that was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To watch him crumble. What are we supposed to do now? My aunt finally asked, her voice trembling. She was looking at Justin like he was a stranger, someone she had never really known. My father cleared his throat, his face hardened with anger I had never seen before. This is beyond just you two. You've betrayed this family, he said, his voice thick with disappointment. You think you can just walk back from this? How are we supposed to trust either of you again? Kate looked up, her tear-streaked face pleading. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake. I'm sorry. Mistakes happen once, I snapped, unable to contain my fury. This wasn't a mistake. This was months of lies, sneaking around, and thinking we were all too stupid to notice. Justin finally spoke, his voice shaky and low. Eric, man, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. His eyes were filled with regret, but the sight of it only disgusted me further. You weren't thinking. Justin, I shot back, leaning in, my voice dangerously calm. You were too busy betraying your own family. You destroyed everything for what? For this? I pointed at Kate, who flinched at the gesture. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, the noise cutting through the tense silence. This family doesn't deserve this. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, they didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. But now it's out there, and there's no fixing it. I hope you're happy with yourselves. Kate's eyes widened in desperation as I spoke. Eric, please don't do this. We can fix it. No, Kate, I interrupted. We're done. You and Justin, you've made your choice. And now you'll live with it. The weight of the finality of my words seemed to crush Kate. She slumped in her chair, broken, while Justin just sat there, staring down at the table. I turned to leave the room, my mind already made up. There was nothing left to say. My marriage was over, my relationship with Justin was destroyed. And the family would never be the same. This wasn't just the end of us. This was the end of everything we had built together. And I was walking away from the wreckage. The drive home was silent. Kate had tried to come after me, but I left her behind at the family gathering. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had chosen Justin over me for months, and now she was alone, cast out by both me and the family. As for Justin, I didn't care what happened to him. He had dug his own grave. When I got back to the house, the reality of it all started to sink in. The house we had built together, filled with memories of happier times, now felt cold and lifeless. Every room and every piece of furniture reminded me of what we used to have, but now it was tainted by the betrayal. I couldn't stay here any longer. Not with the ghost of what once was haunting every corner. I packed a bag, knowing I needed space to clear my head. The divorce papers would come soon enough. The end was already written, and I wasn't going to drag it out. I could hear Kate's voice in my head, begging for another chance, but the truth was, I had nothing left to give her. The love I once had for her was buried beneath layers of anger and hurt, and there was no digging it back up. As I threw the last of my things into the suitcase, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my cousin, Ryan, one of the few family members I had always trusted. He had been at the dinner, watching everything unfold. You did the right thing. Let them burn. We're with you. I stared at the message for a long moment. The family had spoken. Justin and Kate weren't just outcasts in my eyes. They had been exiled from everyone we knew. The web of lies they had spun had unraveled in front of the whole family, and now they were left with nothing but their shame. I typed out a quick reply, thanking Ryan for his support, and then turned off my phone. I needed time. Time to think, time to heal. Time to figure out what came next. As I walked out of the house, I took one last look around. This chapter of my life was over. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never let anyone break me like that again. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in the stillness. There was no going back now. The next morning, I woke up in a cheap motel room, the dull sound of traffic outside mixing with the buzzing in my head. My phone had been ringing all night. Calls from Kate, some from Justin, and even a few from family members who hadn't been at the dinner but had already heard about what happened. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk, wasn't ready to face the aftermath. Not yet, but eventually, the knocking at my door broke the silence. Reluctantly, I got up and opened it, finding Kate standing there, looking like a shadow of the woman I used to know. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she clutched her purse as if it were the only thing holding her together. Eric, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Please, can we talk? I stepped aside, letting her in. There was a part of me that wanted to hear her out. To understand what she thought could possibly excuse what she'd done. Another part of me just wanted this over with, to hear whatever last words she had and move on. Kate sat on the edge of the bed, fidgeting nervously, while I remained standing, arms crossed. I know you don't want to hear this, she started, her voice shaky, but I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. It just got out of control. Out of control? I echoed bitterly. It didn't just happen, Kate. You made choices. You chose Justin. You chose to lie. You chose to betray me. So don't try to downplay it like some mistake. She flinched at my words, tears welling up again. I know I screwed up. But I love you, Eric. I've always loved you. And I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. The desperation in her voice was painful to hear, but it wasn't enough. The love she claimed to have for me felt hollow now. After everything that had happened, how could I believe her? What do you think we can fix? I asked, my voice cold. You broke something that can't be put back together. Do you honestly think we can just go back to the way things were? Kate's lip quivered, and she dropped her head into her hands. I don't know, she sobbed. I don't know what to do. I can't lose you, Eric. I stood there, watching her cry, feeling nothing but emptiness. There was a time when seeing her like this would have shattered me and made me want to comfort her. Hold her, and tell her everything would be okay. But that time was long gone. I've already lost you, Kate, I said quietly. The moment you chose him, you made your decision. There's nothing left for us anymore. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, don't say that. I'll leave Justin. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just give me a chance. I shook my head, the finality of it all sinking in. There's no going back, not after everything you've done. You and Justin, you're done with me. We're done. For a moment, Kate just stared at me, like she was struggling to comprehend the reality of my words. Then, slowly, she stood up, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry, Eric, she whispered, her voice broken. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. You already did. She nodded, tears still falling silently as she walked to the door. She paused for a second as if hoping I might change my mind, but I didn't say a word. Finally, she opened the door and walked out of my life for good. The divorce was finalized quicker than I expected. We kept it quiet and didn't drag it through the mud with lawyers or courtrooms. I had no interest in making things more complicated than they needed to be. We agreed to split everything cleanly, and within weeks, it was done. Just like that, years of marriage were reduced to signatures on paper. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. It was strange. Part of me had expected some kind of catharsis once everything was over. But instead, I just felt numb. The anger had burned out, the betrayal was in the past, and all that was left was an empty space where my marriage had once been. Justin had tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored every attempt. There was no room in my life for him anymore. From what I heard, his relationship with the rest of the family had taken a nosedive, too. No one wanted anything to do with him after what had happened. It was one thing to cheat on your spouse, but to betray your own blood? That was unforgivable. As for Kate, she moved out of town not long after the divorce. She didn't stick around to face the judgment of the family, and I didn't blame her. I heard she was trying to rebuild her life somewhere else, away from the mess she had made. Good for her. I didn't wish her ill anymore, there was no point in holding on to that. But I didn't care to know where she went, either. That chapter was closed. One afternoon, I met with Ryan for coffee. He had been one of the few who stood by me through everything, offering quiet support without judgment. As we sat at the cafe, sipping our drinks, he looked at me with a kind of cautious curiosity. So, how are you holding up? He asked, breaking the comfortable silence. I shrugged. I'm getting by. Some days are better than others. Ryan nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's tough, man, but you did what you had to do. I know, I said, leaning back in my chair. It just feels weird. Like I'm starting over from scratch. You are, but that's not a bad thing. Ryan replied. You've got a chance to build something new, something better. Without all that baggage. I thought about that for a moment, staring out the window at the bustling street. He was right. The life I had known was gone, but that didn't mean it was the end. It was just the beginning of something else. Something unknown, maybe even better. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. Yeah, I said, turning back to Ryan with a small smile. Maybe you're right. The past was behind me now, and I was ready to leave it there. The family gatherings were quieter after the explosion at the reunion. It felt like there was an unspoken tension that everyone carried but refused to address. The news of Kate's affair with Justin had spread like wildfire through the family, and though no one openly discussed it with me, I could see the fallout everywhere. Invitations became more selective, and I could sense the avoidance from some of my cousins. Like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing around me. That all changed when I decided to attend our grandmother's birthday. Despite everything, I felt a strange obligation to keep showing up to these events, if only to demonstrate that I wasn't broken. I wasn't hiding from the family or running from the whispers. In truth, I needed normalcy, even if it was underpinned by tension. The party was being held at Aunt Diane's house. As I pulled up, I felt a tightness in my chest. I hadn't seen Justin since the reunion. No one had. Word was, he had distanced himself. Ashamed to face the family after what had happened. As I walked through the front door, I scanned the room, half expecting to see him. But no, he wasn't there. "Eric, I'm so glad you came," Diane said, greeting me with a hug. There was an awkwardness in her embrace, like she didn't know how to act around me anymore. I gave her a small smile. Wouldn't miss it. The room was filled with familiar faces, all trying to act like everything was fine. I caught a few sideways glances from some cousins as if they were testing the waters. Unsure of how to approach me. It felt surreal, like I was an outsider in my own family. I grabbed a drink and made my way through the crowd, forcing small talk with anyone who dared to approach me. Eventually, I ended up on the patio, needing a break from the forced smiles and polite conversation. Ryan found me there, leaning against the railing with a beer in hand. "Still holding up?" he asked, offering a nod of solidarity. "Barely," I said, smirking. "Feels like everyone's walking on eggshells around me." They don't know how to deal with it," Ryan shrugged. "Hell, I don't even know how to deal with it." We stood in silence for a moment, the awkwardness hanging in the air. "I heard Justin's been keeping his distance," Ryan said cautiously, testing the waters. "Good," I replied, my tone cold. "It's better that way." Ryan nodded, not pushing further. He knew better than to bring up Justin. That part of my life was over, and I wasn't interested in reliving it. But just as I was about to relax, I heard my mother's voice calling my name from inside. I braced myself and walked back in, only to be met with a strange sight. My mother was standing in the middle of the room, holding an envelope. And not just any envelope, one addressed to me, with my name scribbled on the front in handwriting I recognized all too well. "Eric," she said, her face pale. "This came for you earlier today. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you, but..." She handed it to me, and my heart sank. It was from Justin. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. But I didn't give them one. I shoved the envelope into my pocket and walked back out to the patio, leaving the party behind me. Back home, the envelope felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I poured myself a drink and stared at it for what felt like hours before I finally decided to open it. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter, my mind racing with what Justin could possibly have to say after everything. "Eric, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But I've been carrying the weight of what I did for too long. I owe you an apology, not just for what happened with Kate, but for everything. I destroyed our family, and I'll never be able to make up for that. I've been living with this guilt every day since the reunion, and it's tearing me apart. I've cut myself off from everyone because I don't deserve to be around them. I don't deserve their forgiveness. And I certainly don't deserve yours. But I need to say this, I was wrong. I was selfish. And I betrayed you in the worst possible way. Kate and we were both lost, but that doesn't excuse what we did. I take full responsibility, and I'm not asking for you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'll stay away from the family, from you. I won't be a part of your life anymore. You deserve better than that, better than me. I hope someday you can find peace with what happened, but I understand if you can't. Just know that I regret everything. Justin." I read the letter over and over, my emotions swirling in a mix of anger, sadness, and something else. Regret, maybe. Not for him, but for the family we used to be before everything went wrong. He was right about one thing. I didn't need him in my life anymore. But what did it say about me that I couldn't let go of the bitterness? That I still carried this burden of anger, even after he was gone? I crumpled the letter in my hand and tossed it in the trash, trying to push the thoughts away. But they lingered, gnawing at me. I had won. I had exposed him, destroyed the affair, and ensured that the family would never accept him again. But why didn't it feel like a victory? Why did I still feel hollow inside, as if nothing had really changed? As I sat there, alone in my quiet apartment, I realized that no amount of revenge, no amount of anger, could fix what had been broken. The family, the trust, the love, all of it had been shattered beyond repair. Justin's letter didn't change that, and neither did my actions. In the end, all I had left was the emptiness. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. Days passed, and the letter from Justin haunted me. I'd thrown it away, but the words kept creeping back into my mind. I was selfish, I destroyed our family, I regret everything. It was like a broken record playing over and over, and I couldn't switch it off. It wasn't that I forgave him, I didn't. But his words left me with something I hadn't expected: questions. I'd been so focused on my anger, so caught up in making sure he and Kate paid for their betrayal, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I was really left with. The family wasn't the same. After I exposed their affair, things had unraveled in ways I hadn't anticipated. Kate had been shut out of family gatherings. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, they didn't speak her name anymore. And Justin? Well, he'd disappeared, just like he'd promised in that letter. No one had seen or heard from him since. But something about that silence started to feel wrong. The empty spaces where they had once been, the gatherings they no longer attended, the conversations that avoided any mention of their names, felt like they were weighing down on me. It was as if by cutting them out, we had all become lonelier, more fractured. And in all of that, I started to feel the edges of guilt creeping in. I'd gotten what I wanted, hadn't I? I'd exposed the truth, blown up their lives, and made sure everyone knew what kind of people they really were. And yet, instead of feeling free, I felt trapped. Instead of healing, the family seemed to be falling apart. I could see it in the way people tiptoed around each other now. Our once close-knit gatherings felt strained, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next fracture. My parents, who had always been the glue holding the family together, seemed to be drifting further apart. And I had a sinking feeling that I was responsible for all of it. I started to wonder if I had gone too far. But that didn't change what had happened. Kate had betrayed me. Justin had betrayed me. They had shattered the trust that was supposed to be sacred between family members. And as much as the guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't erase that. One evening, after a particularly tense family dinner where everyone avoided the elephant in the room, my father pulled me aside. "You know," he said quietly, "this family is hurting." I nodded, not sure what to say. "I'm not blaming you, Eric. What happened wasn't your fault. But the way things have unfolded." He trailed off, searching for the right words. "We can't go on like this. Everyone's walking on eggshells, and it's tearing us apart." "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice hollow. "I'm saying maybe it's time to let it go." I stared at him, incredulous. "Let it go? After everything they did?" My father sighed, his shoulders slumping as if carrying the weight of the entire family. "I'm not saying forget. I'm saying that holding on to this anger, it's not helping anyone. Least of all you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The anger, the betrayal, it had been my fuel for so long. Letting it go felt impossible. But I couldn't ignore what my father had said. The family was hurting, and deep down, so was I. In the days following my conversation with my father, I found myself in a state of internal conflict. Could I really let go of the anger? Could I move on without the constant weight of betrayal pulling me down? I thought about Kate and Justin, and it hit me that I hadn't even spoken to Kate since the day I confronted her at the family gathering. I had shut her out completely, and in doing so, I had shut out any possibility of closure. One night, after tossing and turning in bed, I made the decision. I had to talk to her. Not to forgive her, not to reconcile, but to finally put the pieces of this shattered relationship to rest. If I was going to heal, I needed to face her one last time. I called her the next morning. Hearing her voice on the other end of the line after so long made my stomach twist. She sounded surprised and hesitant, but agreed to meet. We met at a coffee shop a few towns over, far enough that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. When she walked in, it was like looking at a ghost. She looked different, thinner, more tired, and her once vibrant energy dimmed. I couldn't tell if it was guilt, regret, or something else weighing on her, but whatever it was, it had taken its toll. "Eric," she said softly, sitting across from me. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." I looked at her, the words stuck in my throat for a moment before I finally spoke. "I didn't come here for forgiveness or to fix anything. I just need answers." Kate nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. "I understand." There was a long pause before I asked the question that had been haunting me for so long. "Why? Why did you do it?" She let out a shaky breath, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't. I was lost, Eric. We were distant. I know that's no excuse, but I got caught up in something I couldn't control. I stared at her, waiting for more, but that was it. That was her explanation. It felt hollow and insufficient, but what else could she say? The damage was done. I loved you, Kate, I said, my voice breaking for the first time in months. I trusted you. I know, she whispered, her tears spilling over. And I ruined everything. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. For a moment, I felt the urge to scream at her, to make her feel the pain she had caused me. But then, just as quickly, the anger subsided. I realized that no amount of yelling would change what had happened. No amount of blame would undo the betrayal. We were both trapped in this mess, and there was no going back. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, I said quietly. But I can't keep holding on to this anger anymore. It's destroying me. Kate nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. I'm so sorry, Eric. For everything. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the weight of our broken relationship hanging between us. When we finally stood to leave, there were no goodbyes, no final words of closure. Just a quiet understanding that this was the end. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt something shift inside me. The anger, the bitterness, it wasn't gone, but it was lighter. And for the first time since the affair, I felt like I could breathe again. Maybe my father was right. Maybe it was time to let go. After meeting with Kate, I found myself back in a familiar place, the void of silence. Except this time, it wasn't just between us. The entire family had been caught in the aftermath of my public revelation, and no one knew how to navigate it. The usual family gatherings were either cancelled or awkwardly cut short. Conversations felt forced, as if everyone was tiptoeing around an invisible minefield. I realized that my quest for revenge, while justified in my mind at the time, had consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. I hadn't just broken my relationship with Kate, I had fractured the entire family. Justin's absence had left a hole, one that no one was brave enough to address. And in that hole, resentment and confusion had grown. His parents, my aunt and uncle, had become reclusive, barely showing up to family events. My parents, caught between supporting me and keeping the peace, struggled to maintain any sense of normalcy. My cousins, well, they didn't know what to believe anymore. The once close-knit family I'd grown up with was unraveling at the seams, and I couldn't help but feel responsible. It wasn't long before the phone calls started coming in. My aunt, Justin's mother, was the first. She called one evening, her voice strained with a mixture of anger and sadness. You didn't just ruin your marriage, Eric, she said, her words sharp. You ruined ours too. We lost a son because of what you did. I tried to defend myself. Justin made his choices. I didn't force him to do anything. I'm not excusing what he did, she replied. But you took it too far. You didn't just punish him, you punished all of us. I had no response to that. The truth of her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on my own pain, my own betrayal, that I hadn't considered the ripple effect of my actions. And then came the call from my mother. Eric, this has to stop, she said, her voice weary. I don't know how much more of this the family can take. What do you want me to do, Mom? I asked, frustration boiling over. Pretend like nothing happened? Pretend like everything's fine? No, she replied softly. But you've made your point. The family is falling apart. We need to find a way to move forward. I sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Move forward? How? After everything that had happened, how could we ever go back to the way things were? But deep down, I knew she was right. My revenge had come at a price, and the cost was too high. It wasn't long after those phone calls that I made the decision to meet with Justin. I didn't know if he would agree, or if he was even willing to talk. But I needed to try. The anger, the hurt, the resentment, it had all been simmering for too long, and it was destroying not just me, but everyone around me. I found him in a small town a few hours away. He had been staying at a motel, keeping a low profile. When I knocked on the door, I half expected him to slam it in my face. But he didn't. Instead, he opened it, surprised but not entirely shocked to see me. What do you want, Eric? He asked, his voice tired, defeated. I want to talk, I said simply. He let me in, and we sat across from each other in the tiny, dimly lit room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was palpable, Years of friendship and family ties twisted by the weight of betrayal. I'm not here to forgive you, I started, my voice steady. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that. But we need to figure out how to move on from this. For the family's sake. Justin nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I never meant for it to get this far. He said quietly. I never meant to destroy everything. Well, you did, I replied, the bitterness still raw in my voice. But I did too. And now we're left with this mess. He rubbed his hands over his face, clearly struggling with the weight of it all. I don't know how to fix this, Eric. I don't even know where to start. Neither do I admitted. But we have to try. Our family is falling apart, and if we don't do something, we're going to lose everything. There was a long pause before Justin spoke again. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely a whisper. For everything. I know I can't take it back, but I need you to know that I regret all of it. I stared at him, searching for sincerity in his words. And for the first time since the affair, I believed him. He wasn't the same arrogant man who had once betrayed me. He was broken, just like I was. I believe you, I said finally. But saying sorry isn't enough. We need to fix this, for real. Not just for us, but for everyone. Justin nodded, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. Whatever it takes, he said. We talked for hours that night. Not just about the affair, but about everything, our family, our past, and the future we had to rebuild. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were moments when the old anger flared up. But we pushed through it, both of us knowing that this was the only way forward. By the time I left, something had shifted between us. We weren't friends, not yet. But we weren't enemies anymore either. We were two men trying to rebuild what we had destroyed. It wasn't until I got back home that I realized how much lighter I felt. The weight of the betrayal was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. I had taken the first step toward healing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The family wouldn't heal overnight. There were still wounds that would take time to close and relationships that would need rebuilding. But now, there was hope. The family gathered once again. This time not under the shadow of shame or resentment, but in an attempt to move forward. My mother had organized a dinner, smaller than the usual gatherings, but it was a start. The air was thick with uncertainty, and I could see the hesitation in everyone's eyes as they sat around the table. Justin was there, seated at the far end, away from where I sat. Kate wasn't. She had moved out of our house shortly after the fallout, and while we were still going through the process of divorce. The separation had done little to ease the tension between us. She hadn't spoken to many family members since the night of the revelation. I wondered if she ever would. As dinner began, the usual sounds of conversation and laughter were replaced by careful, measured words. Everyone was tiptoeing around the elephant in the room, but no one was willing to address it. I could feel the strain in my chest, the urge to break the silence and acknowledge what we all knew: things weren't the same. They never would be. But something had changed in me over the past few weeks. The rage that had once consumed me had given way to something else: acceptance. I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't go back and rewrite the mistakes or the betrayals. But I could choose how to move forward, and that meant letting go of the bitterness that had defined me for too long. I stood up, clearing my throat. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. I could feel the weight of their expectations. The unspoken tension of what might come next. I need to say something, I began, my voice steady but soft. I know things haven't been easy lately. I know what I did. What happened between Kate, Justin, and me has affected all of you. I let my anger blind me, and in trying to punish them, I hurt all of us. My aunt, Justin's mother, shifted in her seat, her eyes wary but attentive. Justin looked down at his plate, avoiding eye contact, while my parents exchanged a glance of relief as if they'd been waiting for this moment. I don't expect forgiveness, I continued. And I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. But I am asking for a chance to move forward. I made mistakes, so did Kate, and so did Justin. But we can't let those mistakes destroy us. We're family, and that has to mean something. The silence lingered for a few moments, stretching out as everyone processed my words. I wasn't sure what to expect: anger, maybe, or even indifference. But instead, my mother was the first to speak. We all make mistakes, Eric, she said softly. But we learn from them. And we heal. There was a murmur of agreement from around the table. My aunt nodded, her expression softening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of unity, fragile but present. Justin finally looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and relief. He met my eyes, and while there was no smile, there was a shared understanding between us. We had hurt each other in ways that couldn't be undone. But we had also taken the first steps towards something new, something that might resemble healing, even if it wasn't full forgiveness. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was enough. I nodded, acknowledging the apology without needing to say anything more. As the evening went on, the conversations became lighter and more natural. The heaviness that had hung over us for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a tentative hope. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be for a long time. But it was a start. When the dinner was over, and people began to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "You did the right thing tonight," she said, her eyes filled with pride. "I'm proud of you." I smiled, feeling a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying lifted from my shoulders. "Thanks, Mom." As I left the gathering and drove home, I couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the anger, the revenge, it had all led me to this moment. And while the scars of what Kate and Justin had done would always be there, they no longer defined me. I had sought revenge, thinking it would bring me closure, but in the end, it wasn't the revenge that freed me, it was letting go. Letting go of the need to control how others saw me, how they judged the situation, and how they would react. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt ready to face it. And that, more than anything, was the closure I needed.